All right, welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today we are diving headfirst into an absolutely wild, high-octane magical combat sequence. Now, as I was going through the source material for this, I realized pretty quickly that what we're looking at here isn't just your standard, everyday sparring match. You know the kind. A couple of spells flying back and forth. No, this clash between Mitsuki and the Eternal Titan, Tempest Roma, feels way more like a hardcore masterclass lesson in biomechanics and kinetic energy. It is intense. Over the course of this explainer, we are going to unpack exactly how these two combatants manipulate mass, how they play with momentum, and how they literally alter their very cellular structures just to survive a high-speed collision. If you are someone who absolutely loves digging into the deep, grounded, almost scientific rules of a complex magic system, well, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get into it.
So, right off the bat, I want you to just hold this one central question in your mind as we go through today's analysis. Seriously, think about this. How do you survive a human wrecking ball? Because when your opponent can fundamentally manipulate their very density, when they can literally turn their own body into an unstoppable, hyperdense, kinetic projectile, standard defensive tactics just go completely out the window. Blocking, not an option. Evasion, almost impossible. This is the visceral, terrifying reality of the training session we are looking at today. And the stakes are established instantly. Right from the jump, Tempest Roma tells Mitsuki, point blank, that if she loses her focus for even a single second, she might not survive the session. And she's not being dramatic. This isn't some theoretical, safe environment. This is immediate, life-or-death physical peril driven by unbelievable kinetic forces.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Crucible of Earth. We'll be looking at how this environment is armored for survival.
Let's set the scene and dive right into the specific environment where this terrifying clash actually takes place. The physical setting itself is honestly our very first major clue about the sheer, mind-boggling scale of the power being thrown around here. This training room is no ordinary gym. The walls are heavily, heavily armored. And why? Because if they weren't, the room simply wouldn't survive the ambient pressure and the devastating kinetic impacts of this one training session. It would be leveled. Now, right before the physical blows actually start landing, Tempest Roma gives Mitsuki this incredible foundational lesson in how this specific magic actually anchors to human biology. To acclimatize to the element of Earth, a combatant has to host it within specific biological systems. I want you to think about your own body for a second. Your bones and your nails, those are the most mineral-dense parts of you, right? That makes them the absolute perfect, natural hosts for an Earth element. By tying the magic directly into these hard parts, as well as the blood and the rapidly growing cells of the hair, you aren't just casting a spell outward. You are fundamentally, internally altering your own biological density. It is absolutely fascinating.
And that biological alteration brings us right to the terrifying transformation at the absolute center of this clash. It's called Mode Turtle Warship. Now, Tempest Roma initiates this reinforcement type forte, which is essentially a highly specialized magical technique, and something incredible happens to her body. Her mass begins to gradually increase, but here's the kicker. Her physical form doesn't distort. Instead of blowing up and turning into some massive giant, all of that immense new mass consolidates tightly within her normal frame. She takes on a slender but noticeably more muscular appearance, and this brilliant, shining golden armor appears, completely fused to her body. So think about what's actually happening here. She has essentially increased her internal density to completely unimaginable levels. She's taking her standard human frame and packing it so densely that she turns herself into an incredibly heavy, hyperdense weapon.
Then the actual combat begins, and honestly, just reading this part of the source material, the sheer kinetic energy is completely off the charts.
Blitz Force, Thrust Forte!
Tempest Roma roars. She takes 3 massive, literally ground-shaking sprinting steps forward, and then she thrusts herself violently into the air, aiming straight at Mitsuki. This entire sequence is all about one thing: explosive acceleration. By taking those 3 massive, heavy sprinting steps, she is consciously building up an immense foundational velocity right before launching herself. She is taking all of that newly consolidated mass we just talked about, combining it with that sprinting speed, and turning herself into a literal high-speed projectile.
But wait, she doesn't just stop there. Mid-air, things escalate to an even crazier level. While she's literally flying through the air, Tempest Roma roars out, "Body reinforcement, mass consolidation!" So she is already acting as a high-speed projectile, right? But then her mass and her overall weight greatly increase once again mid-flight, and it happens entirely without altering her outward appearance. Let's talk physics for a second. We know that momentum equals mass multiplied by velocity. She already had the high velocity from her sprint and her launch, and now, while mid-flight, she is exponentially increasing the mass variable of that equation. This creates an absolutely, mathematically unstoppable kinetic strike. For Mitsuki, who is just watching this hyperdense human missile barreling toward her, her gut physically tightens. She barely, and I mean barely, dives out of the way, narrowly avoiding a strike that absolutely would have completely obliterated her on the spot.
Moving right along to Section 2, the physics of combat, where we'll explore momentum management.
So, here's a massive problem. When you are a human wrecking ball, missing your target isn't just an oops moment. It means you are going to hit the solid wall behind them at terminal velocity. So how on earth does the user prevent their own insane mass and speed from completely crushing their bones on impact? Well, let's look at the precise three-step biomechanical sequence Tempest Roma executes to manage this devastating kinetic recoil. First, right before she hits the wall, she calls out reverse alignment. She literally contorts her body in reverse mid-air so her feet land perfectly flat on those heavily armored walls. Second, the split second she makes contact, she immediately crouches. She focuses all her internal energy directly into her legs, and her leg bones drastically strengthen to endure the unbelievable crushing force of the pressure. She is basically using that crouch as a massive biological shock absorber. But here's the thing about physics. That pressure still has to go somewhere, which brings us to step 3, discharging the excess energy. She uses those armored walls like a gunsling. She stores that unbelievable kinetic energy in her legs, turning the recoil into a loaded spring, and then fires herself right back at Mitsuki like a bullet.
I really want to look closer at that third step for a second, because it is both visually and biologically stunning. Like I said, that extreme kinetic pressure doesn't just vanish into thin air. It has to be redirected. So, what happens? The excess energy flows violently through her blood, shoots all the way up her spine, and is violently discharged straight through her hair. Talk about the ultimate bad hair day, right? This massive energy dump actually causes her hair to visibly spark with energy and physically grow longer in real time. This isn't just a cool visual, it's a massive, visceral detail highlighting the extreme biological stress her body is under. Her hair sparking and growing proves that her body's cellular regenerative abilities have to be radically artificially accelerated just to survive the sheer internal forces of her own magical technique.
So Mitsuki barely manages to survive that first high-speed ricochet, basically falling to the ground in a stroke of pure luck. But Tempest Roma, she doesn't even pause. She instantly uses the ceiling to launch yet another strike. And then she escalates this entire attack to a terrifying brand new level. Blitz Force, Temporal Gates, she calls out. Suddenly, a magical portal materializes right on the floor. Tempest Roma flies straight through it, disappearing. A split second later, Mitsuki feels this massive rush of wind right behind her, and then portals begin opening absolutely everywhere. Tempest Roma's speed is actually increasing with every single thrust off a wall, the ceiling, or through a portal. She is actively forming an inescapable high-speed grid of kinetic attacks all around Mitsuki. It is literally a three-dimensional nightmare of teleporting mass and momentum.
And that brings us to Section 3, Awakening Magnetic Perception. Let's see how Mitsuki adapts to this impossible grid.
Seriously, how do you adapt when your opponent is a hyper-dense, teleporting projectile moving at speeds that literally create rushing wind indoors? Mitsuki is rapidly running out of room to maneuver, and she realizes very quickly that her initial evasion strategy is completely failing. Initially, you see, she was relying on something called zone perception to rapidly calculate Tempest Roma's physical trajectories off the walls and the roof, trying to just dodge out of the way. But with the addition of the temporal gates, evasion becomes mathematically impossible. You can't dodge what you can't track. So she is forced to completely shift her tactics to a matching force strategy. She realizes that to survive the grid, she must match Tempest Roma's incoming kinetic force. Mitsuki starts visualizing these massive images of the elemental pools in her mind. She consciously pulls the raw energy of the pool of earth directly into her own body. She aggressively strengthens her bones, her hair, her nails, and her blood, which, if you remember, are those exact same biological anchors Tempest Roma taught her about at the very beginning of the session. Suddenly, a massive wave of tension flows through Mitsuki's body, increasing her physical speed and her reaction time absolutely dramatically.
And this intense internal shift unlocks an entirely new, incredibly powerful sensory adaptation for Mitsuki. As she's desperately sidestepping an incoming attack, she notices something really odd. She can actually feel waves of magnetic energy flowing directly along the exact trajectory of Tempest Roma's attacks, and she feels them right before the physical thrust actually occurs. This right here is the awakening of magnetic perception.
Because Mitsuki has successfully acclimatized her own biology to the earth element, she can now physically sense the magnetic precursor to Tempest Roma's high-mass strikes. It's almost like sensing the invisible pull of two massive magnets before they even touch each other. Armed with this, Mitsuki doesn't just desperately dodge anymore. She uses this split-second early warning system to actively deflect the incoming attack, stepping into it with a perfectly timed palm thrust to Tempest Roma's body, literally altering the physical trajectory of the human wrecking ball.
Now for the climax. Section 4, Surviving the Rebound, where we see these clashing forces collide.
Okay, so Mitsuki hasn't just learned to sense these high-speed attacks, she has boldly decided to fight mass with mass, as she feels the distinct magnetic force of yet another attack rocketing toward her from behind. She somersaults away, lands incredibly firmly on her feet, and then takes 3 massive sprints forward of her own, completely mirroring Tempest Roma's exact technique. She screams out, "Blitz Force! Thrust Forte!" and launches herself into the air. When I got to this specific part in the source material, I was just blown away. It is an absolute spectacle of fantasy physics. We now literally have 2 hyperdense human wrecking balls blitzing through the air, chasing each other at rapid, breakneck speeds until they violently clash midair. And they do this over and over again. Every single time they collide, the immense raw force of the released kinetic energy physically rocks the entire heavily armored crucible. It's like watching the most chaotic, high-speed ping-pong match ever conceived. They use the massive repulsive force of their own mid-air collisions to fly backward toward the armored walls, reverse their alignment just like we talked about earlier, and then launch themselves right back at each other for another strike.
Eventually, the combatants execute one final massive clash. Their feet hit the ground, and the immense kinetic friction of their speed causes them to coast backward until they finally slide to a halt. They both breathe deeply, releasing all that excess mass and pent-up energy, their physical features reverting back to normal. And it's right here, in the quiet, panting aftermath of this explosive fight, that Mitsuki realizes and reveals the terrifying true biological cost of using turtle worship. Yes, the technique provides absolutely incredible mass and momentum consolidation, making you a powerhouse, but the skeletal pressure it puts on the user is completely beyond normal human limits. Remember that excess energy sparking from Tempest Roma's rapidly growing hair? That wasn't just a side effect. That was a mandatory, massive spike in cellular regeneration. Try to imagine the absolute worst muscle fatigue or deep tissue workout soreness you've ever felt in your entire life, and now multiply that feeling by 1,000. Without her radically enhanced cellular regeneration rate actively working while in this mode, Tempest Roma's entire physical form would be an absolute unbearable agony just from the sheer internal friction and the massive impact force of utilizing the technique.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought to ponder today. At the end, Tempest Roma praised Mitsuki for successfully unlocking her magnetic perception, essentially validating that the training was a massive success. But I want you to look at the terrifying razor's edge they are constantly walking on with this magic. If a highly controlled training session held safely inside a specially armored room requires an extreme, hyper-accelerated level of cellular regeneration just to prevent the user's own body from literally tearing itself apart in pure agony, what kind of catastrophic, permanent physical toll does Mode Turtle Warship demand when it is pushed to its absolute breaking limits in a true, extended, life-or-death battle? Think about it. How long can the human body's cells forcefully regenerate at that insane speed before they simply burn out entirely? It really makes you view this incredible magical feat not just as an overpowered weapon, but as a tremendous, incredibly dangerous physical sacrifice. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and as always, keep questioning the hidden physics of the fantastic. See you next time.